Well, good evening. It's good to see you here tonight. Got a small crowd. We got the Sweat Fest going on at Camp Inagahi this week, so several of our folks are out there, and got some exciting news to announce. We have two new brothers as of just a few minutes ago, Carson and Tucker Hopkins were baptized just a few minutes ago out there. So that is super, super, super exciting, and it's what camp's all about, right? That's what makes it special. Few announcements. Dave is Cedar Grove Summer Series tonight. So if you're planning on going to his speech class, stay right here. Because most of the attendees are at camp anyway, so this was a good week for him to be away. A couple on our sick list. David Nash is in Encompass Rehab, hopes to go home shortly. I'm sure he would love a call or a text. Jim O'Brien will have a pre-op on Monday for a kidney procedure this coming Wednesday. He will also have an MRI on Tuesday as part of his pain management therapy for sciatic nerve pain. Continue to remember the folks on both sides of the war in Ukraine. Already mentioned Camp Inagahi going on. Please keep praying for them. That is over Friday evening. I've been checking in on them, and they said they're just having a fantastic time out there. June 21st, general primary election runoff is in the fellowship hall. Upcoming events, we've got a game night on July 8th at 6 p.m. If you haven't already put on your calendar, VBS Super Saturday, do that July 16th, and then July 19th. Lifeline screening will be in the fellowship hall. There is more information in the foyer for that. Paul Lyons is going to lead our singing tonight, and I'll have the devotional, and then in a few minutes before we start to say head to class, but before we start class, David Decker will lead us in prayer.
On Jordan's homey banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I'm bound for the promised land. O'er all these wide extended plains, I'm one eternal day. There God the Son forever reigns and scatters night away. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I'm bound for the promised land. I'll fill with delight my rapture soul would here no longer stay. The Jordan's waves around me roll, for I saw lost away. But I am bound for the promised land, and I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. 824. 824.
Yes, and also we've got a lot of folks missing because of the weather. On our way in from Peachtree City, we got quite the nice little hailstorm, which is kind of weird. It's 100 degrees outside and there's ice falling around you. I don't get that. I watched a movie a little while ago on Netflix called Operation Mincemeat. Have you seen it? Any of y'all seen that? It's a story or a movie that's actually based on a true story of how British military intelligence cooked up this scheme to send false information to the Germans during World War II about where and how they were going to invade Southern Europe. I think the message was we're trying to invade Greece, but instead they invaded Sicily. And they came up with this crazy idea that it involved taking the corpse from a morgue, of a homeless man and dressing him up like this officer, military officer, and then they would release the body from a submarine just off the coast of Spain. They did it off the coast of Spain because Spain was neutral during World War II. And then the idea was the body would float up onto the shore. The people would find the body, turn it over to the officials, and what they were banking on was that the officials would find this fake documents on the body of this corpse, and because they were neutral, they knew they were playing both sides, and there was German operatives there. It would get into the hands of the Germans. And the plan was meticulous. The body of the dead man had to be believable to the Germans, so it was very important that they got the right-looking corpse. He had to look like an officer. The wounds on him had to be consistent with that of somebody that may have crashed in a plane crash. He had to have a believable identity, so they invented this whole identity for the man, and not just the identity, but they had a backstory for who this man was. So if the Germans investigated him, they would figure out that this guy, he's gotten these different awards and he's lived in these different places and all. They even got a look-alike for him to take pictures of the look-alike so his identification cards would look like the corpse. The uniform the man wore, it couldn't be nice and crisp like brand new, it had his name on it. It had to look a little worn, so one of the officers in the intelligence, as they were putting all this together, he wore that same uniform day after day after day, so it would look just a little bit worn. They even put a love letter in the guy's pocket along with a picture of his made-up fiancée. So it would be believable. Put some movie ticket stubs in there, things like that. The whole plan was crazy that this thing would work. And it was just a stretch that it was even going to work. It was just so bizarre. And even though the powers that be had their serious doubts about whether this would work, and in fact, if this could actually blow up in their face and the consequences of this mission going bad, they had faith in the men that came up with the plan, so they decided to proceed with it. And the rest is history. The plan worked. The Germans got the information. Hitler pushed most of his forces and most of his equipment to Greece, and the Allied forces ended up coming up through Sicily, and it was a great success for the Allies. In the Bible, there is another wartime story that seems really far-fetched and crazy. Judges chapter 6 tells the real-life story of how the Israelites took possession of the city of Jericho. Y'all know the story very well. God instructs Joshua to have the army stay completely silent and march around those big, massive walls of Jericho for 6 days in a row. March once around for 6 days in a row, and as they carry the Ark of the Covenant, and have 7 priests blow ram horns as you walk around. Seventh day, they march around the walls 7 times and blow the horns. But this time, the army on command yells, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And the rest is history. The plan, just as God had told them would work, worked. The walls fell, and the Israelites took the city. A couple of ways we can characterize God's commands here in Joshua chapter 6. One is they were meticulous. Specific and detailed instructions were given. How many days they were to walk around. How many times a day. How many priests were to blow the horns. What kind of horns they were to blow. When the people were to shout. When they were to be silent. So that's number one that can characterize it. Another thing is, can characterize this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. Nothing about this mission makes any sense to us as humans. Human wisdom would never devise a plan like this. And I think about it as if I was an Israelite and I'm hearing this, I'd think, boy, this is crazy. This is what you want us to do, Joshua? But they did it, and it worked. When facing a crisis in our life, we needed to respond in the exact same way, with the same kind of faith and obedience as Joshua did and the people did. We need to follow God's law meticulously. Not just part of it, but all of it. Not just the easy parts, all of it. We need to follow God's law even when it doesn't make sense to our human way of thinking. Operation Mincemeat during World War II, not because it was crazy and far-fetched, but it worked. It was meticulous, and the powers that be had faith in the ones that came up with the plan. The walls of Jericho fell, not because it was crazy and far-fetched, but because it was a plan that God put forth. And He was the one that they had faith in. And they carried it out meticulously. So I encourage you tonight, let's have the faith in God and follow His plans, even when they maybe seem kind of crazy to us and they don't fit our human way of thinking. Tonight you're here and your faith may be wavering. Maybe you've got some things going on in your life that you're struggling with, and maybe you need the prayers of the good Christians that are here. Maybe you just need somebody to put your arm around you. We're here for you. We can help you out with that. We can pray for you. It may be that you've come to the stage in your life, looking around, I think all of us that are in this room are baptized, but there may be someone that's not. Maybe you can be just like Carson and Tucker and put Christ on in baptism tonight. Whatever your need is, we encourage you to come as we stand and sing.
That morning when the sun is low, when I die, hallelujah,
together. Holy Father, we come together this evening seeking to glorify your name, focusing on your word, and remembering your great love for mankind. We rejoice tonight at the news of Carson and Tucker and their obedience of the gospel. Ask you to bless them in their journey for you for the rest of their days. We're mindful of those who are teaching tonight, and especially Dave Rogers, who's away from us speaking. Pray that you would bless each one and bless our other members who are at camp, who are doing the same thing in a setting that is on the other side of Atlanta. We're mindful, Father, of those who are sick and ask your blessing upon each one. Ask your healing power to be in each case if it's your will. We're mindful, Father, and thankful for the brief respites that we have from the heat when rains come and cool things off. And we're grateful for your being mindful of our need in that way. Especially, Father, do we thank you tonight for Jesus, for what he did at Calvary, for the plan that you had that was carried out to the letter, so that we could have the opportunity of being saved. It's in his name that we ask this prayer. Amen.
Hello. Can you all hear me, even all the people in the back row? Okay, thanks. I was told that maybe I had my microphone a little bit too low in some previous classes, so I hope everybody can hear me. And I apologize for the trouble I have sometimes hearing you, so please feel free to comment. I really, think our class goes a lot better when everybody, it feels free to add their thoughts and comments, and I think that's really what helps us learn. Appreciate everything that's taken place so far this evening. Brother Paul, it was really good to see you lead singing again. It's been so long, but I appreciate that, and I really appreciate the good devotional tonight, Greg. There was an earlier movie about that same operation, a movie from the 50s, starred Clifton Webb, called The Man Who Never Was. And it has one of my all-time favorite beginnings for a movie, the opening, because it's a voiceover. It shows the body wash up on the beach, the corpse that they used, and this guy with a terrific, deep Scottish accent says this little poem, says, "Last night I dreamed a deadly dream beyond the Isle of Skye. I saw a dead man win the war, and I dreamed that man was I." But that has nothing to do with our class, but it's a good movie nevertheless, The Man Who Never Was. What does have to do with our class are some of the things Greg talked about in his devotional, is who you have faith with and how God's plan can be relied on. It'll work. And that really relates to the person we're going to talk about tonight, or begin talking about, as we continue our series on what we've called Old Testament figures who teach New Testament faith. And the handouts that we've prepared for this figure are on the table in the back if anyone needs one, would like one and didn't get one. And I've kind of been looking forward to this class because, as I think I told you last week, the character we're going to talk about beginning this week has always been one of my very favorite people in the Bible, and that's Caleb, who usually, going back to Greg's devotional, when you think about Caleb, what do you usually think about? okay? The 12 spies, right? And what about the 2 spies? I mean, the 10 versus the 2, right? But don't we usually think Joshua and Caleb? But Caleb was a lot more than just, a sidekick. He wasn't a secondary person at all. He was one of the great heroes of faith in his own right. And he did a lot of things that I think we seldom talk about, even in his older age. We all know the story about how 12 spies were sent to spy on Canaan, and 10 were bad and 2 were good, like the little old song goes, and we'll talk about that tonight. But Caleb didn't do just that, although that alone makes him a terrific hero of the faith. And it's interesting, though, one of the things I like about Caleb, I guess, that appeals to me is his humility, because he never sought to take any credit, and he's not listed in Hebrews chapter 11, the great Hall of Fame, we often call it, of faith, at least not by name. But his type of person is certainly the type who would be in there. So Caleb, we're introduced to him in Numbers chapter 13, at a time in the history of Israel that should be one of the great triumphant moments in their history. Because what's happened? Where are they at? What's happened with Israel? They had been in, did you say in bondage for a while? Right. They've been in the wilderness now a little over 2 years. And I guess I get that from Numbers, the first chapter, because it says on the second year after they left Egypt, that's when they took the census. So they've traveled a little over 2 years, and they're pretty much there now, about to go into the promised land. And that idea, the promised land, the whole thing that they've lived for through their years in captivity as slaves in Egypt, and the thing they've had to hang on to, the hope, here they are. It should be just a great moment in their history. And it turns out to be a great moment in their history, but great in the other sense, really significant, but not so good, because it's a big turning point for the nation of Israel. Let's look at Numbers chapter 13, read about this, beginning with the first part of the chapter. And it reads, Numbers 13, and now I'm reading from the New King James, pardon me. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. Even in those 2 verses, we learn several things. Why are they going into this land? I mean, where's this land coming from as far as they're concerned? For them. What did God say about it? The land that I am giving to them. He is giving it to them. Now, and we know that. We know that it's been promised all the way back from Abraham's day. And why do you reckon, here's the first question, that God thought the land would need to be spied out by the Israelites? Didn't God already know what was there? Didn't God already know what kind of land it was?
Maybe this was a test
What kind of a test? Maybe it was a test.
of faith.
Of faith? For who? The spies or?
The spies and then the report that they come back.
Okay, it did turn out.
God knew what they were going to see there.
Yep, right, exactly. God knew what they were going to see there. And it did turn out to be a test. I think that's an excellent point, and I hadn't actually thought of it in those terms, but it certainly did prove to be a test that they failed. But, God had already spied out this land for himself. If you look over in Ezekiel, way later on when he talks to the prophet Ezekiel, in one of those places where things that happened in the past are recounted in the scriptures, God tells Ezekiel in chapter 20, verse 6, he says that he had already I think the old King James said, espied it himself. The New King James says that he had searched it out for them. If I can find Ezekiel 20, 23, 22. Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 6. Well, I'll read 5 too for the context. This is God speaking, of course. He says, "Say to them, thus says the Lord God, on the day when I chose Israel and raised my hand and oath to the descendants of the house of Jacob and made myself known to them in the land of Egypt." There's that promise. "I raised my hand and oath to them, saying, I am the Lord your God. On that day," verse 6, "I raised my hand in an oath to them to bring them out of the land of Egypt into a land that I had searched out for them, flowing with milk and honey." And there's a familiar phrase to us, isn't it? How often is the land of promise, the promised land, described that way? The land flowing with milk and honey. God himself describes it that way, and he says he has searched it out. A land that I had searched out for them, flowing with milk and honey, the glory of all lands. So God had already done some spying. And in that case, why would he say to Moses, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan"? Well, look over in Deuteronomy, the first chapter, verse 22. We find, and here's another place where Moses is reflecting and talking about things that have happened in the past. And he recalls this incident, Deuteronomy chapter 1. Which comes right after Numbers. Verse 22, Moses said, in 21 he had talked about how God had set the land before them. "Go up and possess it, as the Lord God of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not fear or be discouraged." Remember that. Moses is telling the people, that's what God said. Go up and possess it. Do not fear or be discouraged. Here in verse 22, he says, "And every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us, and let them search out the land for us, and bring back word to us of the way which we should go up, and of the cities into which we shall come." I think I wanted to read the next part of the verse and let my page flip over too soon, but let me check that. "Yes, the plan pleased me well," Moses said. "So I took 12 of your men, one man from each tribe." So we go back to Numbers 13, where this incident is recorded. And the Lord said to Moses, "Send these men to spy out the land." It appears that God had already spied it out, and the people themselves wanted it spied out. It was their idea to send spies. And God doesn't appear to disapprove of this plan, because he says to Moses, "Send these men." So, in the land had been promised, we talked about that, described even by God himself as flowing with milk and honey in Exodus 3:8, and in 6:8, again he says, "Go and possess it." Well, that's Deuteronomy that we read, verse Deuteronomy 1:21. "Go up and possess it. Do not be afraid." What kind of a statement is that? What kind of a sentence would you call that? Go and possess it. Do not be afraid. I mean, is it a question? Is it just an exclamation like ouch? Go up and possess it. It is a command. It's something they were supposed to do. Well, what do you think it meant when God says go up and possess it, when he also said, I'm giving it to them?
He gave us salvation.
Yes?
We got to go get it.
Okay, I think that's excellent. This to me is a great picture, even in the Old Testament, of grace and faith. God was giving them this land, but did that mean all they had to do was sit back and let God roll the wheels of their wagons and horses into that land and plant all the crops for them and build their houses and everything? Of course it didn't mean that. They had a part in taking over this territory, even though God was, no question about it, giving it to them. Sir.
Keeping it, which they didn't.
Right, that's right.
That's why it's not due to them today.
Mm-hmm. Exactly so. They were supposed to possess it, go up and possess it, which included, keeping that land. Well, they failed, and there's where part of that, the test that Luann referred to, came in. It begins here, in a sense, in Numbers 13. Look at Exodus chapter 23, verses 20 through 33. God talks about, this land and their part in what they're supposed to do. Exodus chapter 23, beginning in verse 20. 23. Oh, pardon me, I've been in Numbers there. I need to go a little backwards, which is fitting, isn't it, for me? Exodus chapter 20, beginning at 23, Exodus 23, beginning at verse 20. And God says, "Behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared." See any parallels there with even our lives today? The place which I have prepared? Well, we all know what that place is, don't we? Right? What is it?
John 14, Jesus said, "I will."
Of course, right. Heaven, the prepared place, as we often say, for prepared people. "Behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Beware of him and obey his voice." Talking about Moses. "Do not provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. But if you indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the Amorites and the Hittites and Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. You shall not bow down." He goes on, gives them instructions about maintaining the faith, the integrity of their faith, their worship of the one God. "You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and completely break down their sacred pillars. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. No one shall suffer miscarriage or be barren in your land, and I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my fear before you. I will cause confusion among all the people to whom you come, and will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I'll send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, the Hittite from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out before you until you have increased and you inherit the land." Now, is this a picture of these people having to do nothing because God has given them this great land, the land beyond all other lands, as he himself described it, flowing with milk and honey? They have a lot to do. What are some of the things they have to do? Or how could you sum up all of the things they have to do in a single word or a single idea? Yes, thank you. They have to obey. Remember, he said, if you keep the way, and if you do this, drive them out. Do all these things because I told you to, I am telling you to, and I am the Lord. Now, back in Numbers 13, where our story begins, the story of Caleb. he's introduced as one of these men chosen to go. And we learn a little bit about these men. What kind of people were they supposed to be? Yes, right. So Moses sent them according from the will. Well, yeah, God said, from each tribe of your fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. What kind of qualities do you think that meant? Caleb, since he's one of these guys. So was Joshua. So were 10 other guys whose names most of us could not recite. But what kind of qualities would he have had to be a leader of the tribe, do you think? And we'll see more of the qualities that he demonstrates as we go on in his life. But what makes a leader? What kind of qualities would he have had? Courage. Caleb had that. He had that in spades. Faith, right. Faith, courage, respect. Who would he have had respect for? For God, right. But I suspect to be one of the leaders of these people, he probably also had to show some respect for his brethren, the other people who were with him. But a lot of qualities. So it wasn't just, first person you see. It was 12 guys who are to be leaders. Well, getting back to the idea of sending the spies, we said that the Lord had already spied it out. The people themselves, Moses had said in Deuteronomy, asked him to do this, to send the spies, and the plan pleased me well. And it pleased the Lord, apparently, because he tells Moses here to do that. Do you see any parallels to all this going to spy out the land, to a reconnaissance mission, we would call it in military terms today? See any parallels to that in any part of our lives as Christians? Particularly maybe when we begin that life as Christians, when we make the decision, like Carson and Tucker have, to be disciples. What do we have to do? Do you remember what Jesus talked about to his disciples when he talked about counting the cost? Know what's ahead of you. Look over in Luke 14. Luke chapter 14. Look here, I almost turned right to that one. And Jesus himself uses the same sort of military analogy. And what these Israelites had in store for them were some battles. They were told to conquer these people, to drive them out, tear down their pillars and all that. There were going to be battles. So they would want to know some things we'll talk about in a minute. But Jesus says we need to know what lies ahead too. Beginning in verse 26 in Luke 14, he says, if anyone comes to me, does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now we understand that language, that word hate from the older English and I guess older other languages meant really not hate as we know it, total malice and disregard and hatred for somebody, but just to love less. So your mother, even your father, mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters aren't supposed to be more important than Jesus. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. And here he talks about counting the cost. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it began to mock him, saying, this man began to build, was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, and there's the military analogy, does not sit down first and consider whether he is able to come, or able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000. Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and seeks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Isn't it just good common sense to try your best to know what's ahead for you, particularly if you're under marching orders, if your mission is to go take over this country that you haven't been to? Isn't that just good common sense? Well, it's part of, I think, like counting the cost. Even though, yes, just as God promised Israel this promised land, we have a place prepared for us that's ready. He's going to give that to us, but we have to do our part, and part of that involves knowing how to meet these challenges that lie ahead, knowing what you're in store for, being prepared for those things. And, so that's why they sent out the spies. And, they got instructions that would sound real familiar, I guess, if anybody is in the military today or has ever been on any kind of reconnaissance missions. It's about the same kind of intelligence that a commander today would ask for. Verse 17, it says, after it gives the section where it gives all the names, including Caleb and Joshua and the other 10, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua, the way we know him. Then he sent them to spy the land of Canaan and said to him, go up this way into the south and go up into the mountains. See what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went out, spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And then basically they made a sort of a circuit from south to north and back down again. Went up along the coast, more or less, I think, and I'm not very great on Bible geography. It's not my strong point at all. But I believe they went north, kind of paralleling the Jordan River, and then came back down along the western coast of this area. And they were supposed to find out, like I said, the same kind of information that a military commander would likely want today. What's the terrain like? Are the cities fortified? They mentioned that. About the people, what kind of morale do they have? Are they willing to put up a fight? Or are they going to give way right away? Are they people who like to be warriors? Are they people who like to be something else? Be of good courage, Moses said. And again, when he says that, Moses, and he's given these instructions, what kind of a statement is that? Isn't that also a command? Now that's kind of a command that we don't often think about because it talks about the sort of the attitude we have, and it's something that I think we often feel like is beyond our own control, whether we have courage or not. And yet he told them to be of good courage. So we must be able to give ourselves some courage in some ways, right? Otherwise, would God and Moses both have said that? Be of good courage. Or God said, do not fear. Not the kind of command, perhaps, that we often think of as a command, but that was still a command. They were also commanded, remember, to bring back some of the physical evidence to support the intelligence that they were gathering, some of the fruit. And this was the time of ripe grapes. So they go. And they came up through the south and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Sheshai, Sheshai, Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. Now, remember those guys, the descendants of Anak, because they will figure in Caleb's life story later on in a really significant way. And it's interesting what the spies say in a little while when they give their report, when they come back, about those guys called Anakim or Anakin. By the way, does that ring a bell with anybody? Anakim or Anakin as a name? Any Star Wars fans in here? Who was named Anakin? Anakin Skywalker. I could read your lips that time. That's right. Who became, I have you now, Skywalker, Darth Vader. And it makes me wonder if George Lucas went to Sunday school and knows this story, the story of Caleb. But the Anakin were mentioned, and they were pictured by the spies, as we'll see in a little while, as some bad dudes, some fearsome people. But they spent 40 days, and they brought back grapes on a pole, verse 21. Was that 21? No. Well, later on, they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it between two of them on a pole. And they also brought some pomegranates and figs. That was in this place called the valley of Eshcol, which means cluster, because the cluster which the men of Israel cut down there. They returned from spying after 40 days. Though when they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. They used the physical evidence that they had to support their report. And I always wonder how they managed to make sure that all the congregation, all of the people were able to hear this report. You know, as we've mentioned before, there must have been around 2 million people or more, including women and children and Levites, because earlier in Numbers it had said the number of men of military age who had left Egypt were 650,000 and change, something like that. So they didn't have loudspeakers in those days that I know of. May have been a miraculous loudspeaker, but God wanted, apparently, all of the people to hear the report. And there again, that seems to make sense because they needed to know what they were up against. Of course, they also needed to know who was on their side and should have known that, but there was one of their big pitfalls. Well, their report, they said the land is good. It flows with milk and honey. Sound familiar? The thing that had always been said about the promised land. God himself said that, and they confirmed it. It is a good land. It flows with milk and honey. But look here. Verse 28. And here might be the very turning point that we talked about when I said this whole incident in the life of Caleb and where he first comes to our attention in the scriptures should have been a great moment of triumph for the nation of Israel as they are about to receive the promised land. But we'll find out that these people did not receive the promised land, and we know that story, at least in general terms. But nevertheless, they said, nowadays we don't use that word very much in speaking. What do we say? If I was one of the spies, I would have come back, I guess, and said, one of the 10, would have come back and said, yeah, the land is good. It is flowing with milk and honey. But nevertheless, somebody said, everybody has a big butt. And we need to watch out for those, you know, especially when it comes to carrying out, as Greg talked about in that great devotional, the plan that God has. Whether it seems the best to us or not, we need to put our trust there and not come up with this nevertheless. So they said, yeah, it truly flows with milk and honey, as promised. And they even showed the fruit. This is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. There they are again, those Anakim. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Now, when they talked about that, apparently, how did the mood of the people turn? What were they about to think? And they voiced it in just a few in the next verses. But what do you think their mood was? What happened with this report that the spies gave? Right, okay, right, yeah. They were feeling, I believe, defeated before they even really began, based on what the spies saw. Now, Caleb was one of those spies. Did he see anything different as far as what was there in the physical world? He was with them. He saw that fruit. He saw the same cities and the same people of these different nationalities. But when they gave that report, said, nevertheless, the people are strong, the cities are fortified, and the descendants of Anak are there. A little later on, at the end of this chapter, it explains about the descendants of Anak, and it says, there we saw giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. They're really feeling like this is mission impossible. Now Caleb, verse 30, quieted the people before Moses. And I always wondered about that too. I'd sure like to know how he managed to do that, because, you know, when a mob gets stirred up, they're hard to deal with, aren't they? And it seems to me that this is what we would have had right here with the Israelites after the spies, the 10, gave this bleak picture. Even though the land itself was good and the produce it produced was fantastic, you know, it took 2 men to carry that one bundle of grapes, cluster of grapes, on a pole. But even though all that's true, we can't do it. The people are too much for us. We're like grasshoppers to them. And I always wondered how Caleb managed to quiet the people. But it says he did before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. Isn't it interesting that he said, let us go up at once and do what? Take possession. What had God said to do with this land? I'm giving you this land, but you have to possess it. Right, go in there. You know, you could probably talk at some depth about what it means to actually possess something rather than just have it. And if you've ever given a gift to somebody, I guess, that they didn't really appreciate, and you come to find out later that they left it in the box, sitting up on a shelf or something, you know, you might feel like they didn't really possess it. But, yes, Brother Paul. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. That's a good parallel. I appreciate you pointing that out, Paul. He points out that Caleb's statement, let us go up at once, for we are able to do it. It's like David who said, isn't anybody going to stand against Goliath? And Goliath was a giant. In fact, there's some evidence I think I've read, but that and he, yeah. Right, evidently not, that's right. And he had told him that. Really, he said, I'm going to go before you, and I'll drive these people out. And as long as you stay in the way, you'll thrive. You won't have much sickness. You won't have any of that bad stuff. But Caleb says, let's go up at once and take possession. He's ready to do it. The great contrast there He wants to possess it as God had commanded them to do, and he says, we are well able to overcome it. The other 10 spies in verse 31 said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. They were leaving something out of their thinking that Caleb did not leave out. And what was that? And this is where we can leave off. I think everybody said the same thing, but what was it? What? Yeah, I think that's exactly right. They didn't include in their own arsenal, I guess you might say, when they were counting the cost, looking at the obstacles that they saw, they didn't figure that they had the most powerful weapon they could have in their arsenal, God himself. Oh, Kelly, yeah.
The thing throughout this, God promised it to them and they needed faith.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like, I'm curious why he decided to send spies, because that feels like that just leveled them all up.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just letting them go in, because whatever comes is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going no matter what. Like, he's going.
Uh-huh.
Like, I'm going, whether you're coming or not.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's probably, it was like it turned out to be, as Luann said early on, maybe God had that in mind, a test. He had promised it to him, and he did give it to him, or he was giving it to him, but there were conditions. They had to accept the gift, and the way they had to accept the gift was doing the things that he told them to do. It's there again, that's like, to me, grace and faith in our lives today. Hugh? But
Everything God does do, you have to go and meet him someplace.
mm-hmm.
And we sometimes take for granted that we have this wonderful gift that we just don't appreciate enough, because every day after we've accepted the Lord, it's an opportunity to continue to grow. And I think that's just human nature. I mean, you ask the question, and all these people took them out of Egypt, took them out, just all kinds of things, and yet they still wanted to rebel, they wanted to go back. I mean, they just never really understood or accepted. And I think that's one of the problems. We got to be real careful of ourselves so that we take the gift that we have for granted. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have people that just never fully earn their potential in reference to what the Lord has given them and what they understand they should have.
I think you're exactly right. I think that one of the great parallels that I see with, talking about how the Old Testament can teach us faith as well. These people said they're stronger than us. We're like grasshoppers to them. Well, has there ever been a period in history when the people of God, today the church, in the Old Testament, Israel, the nation, has there ever been a period in history when, as far as numbers and strength militarily or other ways, wealth and so forth, has there ever been a period in history when God's people were not like grasshoppers compared to the world, to the rest of the world? Haven't we always been that little tiny minority? And because of that, isn't it a pitfall for us that we could come up with the attitude like the 10 spies that said, we're not able to overcome it? And can't you hear that today when people say things like, well, the church can't have much success over there. Those people just won't listen. Or, I wish it wasn't this way, but I can't do anything about it, talking about some condition of the world. And yet, where's our trust? That's what.
I stand in the way. Follow this way. The faith is being tested throughout numbers with the Israelites and what do. So we have that peril every day in our lives. What we encounter, what we go through. But there are a lot of parallels between this and us searching out. He gave the physical evidence. Here he is. And I already told you, I am. And yet still, you have two that see the way and
Right.
have it done.
Yeah, Larry brings a good point. God had given them plenty of evidence of himself, hadn't he? I mean, even in their recent history. Look how they got out of Egypt, the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, and then even as they were in the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land, the 2 years, all the things that they complained about, and he answered and addressed. I'm thirsty. Well, gave them water. We don't have any food, so miraculously he provided the food from the sky, and on and on. In fact, a little later on, God says that 10 times they have rejected me. And, they had plenty of evidence, and yet they just, we often, or at least I often use the expression today, they just couldn't see it. And that is exactly the problem, isn't it? They couldn't see it. Well, where are we looking? So, again, we'll appreciate the good comments. We'll stop here. There's more to tell about these spies and Caleb and what happened here, and then what happened 45 years later in Caleb's life. And we'll talk some more about Caleb next week. Caleb, the servant, God said this about Caleb, who had a different spirit. So, again, appreciate your good comments and hope to see you all back next week. Thank you. We're dismissed.